This is Mew-Z's YouTube podcast, recorded at 9:11 p.m. Ooh, we're going for a late night one. Recorded on the date of 9/26/2013, and today we're going to talk about some humanities, because this is a take two, and we're going to leave it go this time. I was going to originally go into sexism and racism, but I feel like I was tangenting, so I think I'm going to stick with racism, mostly because I think sexism has actual scientific biological backing, even though it doesn't actually work. Basically, we believe that women are inferior because animalistic instincts, therefore we are stupid, whatever, I don't care. Men are not better than women, than any more women are better than men. Feminist, that's right. Talking about feminism. Get over it. So basically, my past month has been spent at a different college. I originally went to a community campus, which actually has a bunch of branches of other colleges throughout the state. And there's a local community campus nearby. 3 buildings, really tiny. And then I started to commute an hour to and an hour from this said new campus that is huge, hundreds of acres, and it's big. Buildings and buildings and buildings. So it's huge and a massive jump, and I'm exhausted. My brain hurts, and I'm just, So, of course, I'm here, of all places, to try to give myself some ideas on what to do, because I've got a couple papers due. Barely started any of them. And do you think that's going to stop me? Of course not. Well, yeah, okay, it's going to stop me. One of the papers is 6 pages long. Do you really think I'm going to work on it right now when it's not due in 2 weeks? Okay, I got an introduction started, but that's not the point. There we go. Wet the whistle, as we used to say back in the day. Wet my whistle. I have a bottle here of soda. There we go. Alright, feel much better. So, what am I here to talk about today is humanities. And first off, I want to vent a little bit, because my humanities class is a history class in drag. That is basically what it is. Humanities, it talks about why we do the things we do as a human race. Well, guess what? It's also a history class, because it talks about the past. Things nobody likes to talk about. But that's okay. We're here to exploit the past, even if it means backstabbing ourselves. Because, well, the history of mankind can be explained in one line from Pocahontas. The white men are savages. Because we are a dangerous species, apparently, and we are not good at what we do. So, first off, we're about ready to go over why racism exists. And the reason why I bring this up is because actually, about a year or so back, I remember going into the very back of the building of my current employment, and I randomly had a question in my head, and I didn't know why. Like, why did this occur? And I simply spoke, why are we racist? Like, why are we sexist? Why are we racist? Why are we homophobic? So, instead of, like, a mouth-dropping, gaping, like, oh my god, why would you ask that? Instead, everyone started to laugh at me, and I immediately turned around and started crying my freaking eyeballs out, because I was like, everyone hates me. But the question still lingers. So this year, I got a humanities class, which basically describes, well, attempts to describe why racism exists. And we're getting in a little bit of feminism, too, but yes, I'm a feminist. Problem? Basically. Okay. We're done talking about that. So, where do we want to start this conversation? Because we started back in the early 600s, when we first started this conversation in class. Even though the class is technically humanities in the 1300s, we started about 600 AD. And it actually kind of skips really fast up to about 1200 and hits 1300, and then from there the rest is history. So basically, we have this conceptual idea that racism is just there to be mean and nasty, and this is true. You know, we're racist, we're prejudiced, we're sexist, we're homophobic. Which, I'm sorry, homophobia is not even a word. I'm sorry, I don't care who you are. You're just worried because a girl's gonna treat another girl better than you could. Or ladies, it's because you're afraid that your boyfriend's gonna be treated better by another man. Sorry, truth is. Bam. But basically, we get this constant idea of questioning where does the root of racism come from, and everybody links themselves to slavery, but nobody can really, unless you've studied the idea, or studied, I hate to say idea, but studied the subject and core of racism, you don't know how to link it to slavery, other than that they were treated badly. And that's not, yes, that is absolute truth, but you gotta dig a little deeper than that. Because it's not just about slavery, it's about why even slavery came about. You could debate that the core reason is sugar, but I'm going to explain that in a minute. You could debate that it was because of certain evolutionary scientific certain discoveries that they supposedly found. We'll get to that in a minute. Either way, it wasn't an all-at-once scenario. It didn't hit at once. And I will also say this, it also wasn't like as soon as the white man saw the black man, there was instant racism. It's not how it works. It wasn't that, you're black, you're bad, you're different than us. It was like an immediate result. That's not what this is. This is not how it started. We know that there's two. Let's start with this, okay? I originally started this with my other podcast, my other take, but we're gonna go ahead and try it. There's two different concepts of slavery that I understand. There may be more, but these are the two that we discussed. The American understanding of slavery that we've been drilled since we were like in middle school, and this other form of slavery that I don't even like calling slavery because of what it was. I call it more servitude or servantry because they were more like servants that had the ability to become their own. So what is this thought? We know the American perception of slavery. We know that in America, we as the white man thought that they were lower and not human, therefore they deserve punishment, because a lot of the time it originally might have possibly started from the belief in Christianity, that we thought that we were trying to help them because we wanted to take things and justify. We do that a lot as a race, and human race in general. I mean, Christians do it all the time. We're trying to help the gays because we want them to repent against their sins. Bull, shut up. Shut up. We don't want to get into that conversation. But, because I don't have time, that's not the subject. But, we tend to take things that we learn, whether by education or faith, and turn it into a justification. The one word that was constantly repeated in my humanities class was justification. Everything was justified for their actions. In slavery in America, it is horrible living conditions. Punishment of physical unbearment, of unthinkable pain that no one should ever go through. It is something that our past is not, our people as in Americans, I don't care what color you are, we are not proud of it. Anybody who says they are proud of it, no. I want to say go to hell, but I'm a Christian. I shouldn't say that, but I want to. But you feel, not only feel bad, but you know it's wrong. It's most certainly wrong. But what's this other concept of slavery that I'm wanting to talk about that I want to call servitude? Because in the Ottoman Empire, back before the African Americans made it to America, it ended around the late 1600s, I believe, in the Ottoman Empire. I could be wrong. Please do not quote me on that. That might be the 1700s. They had slaves. Their slave system is not the same as America. Not only did they not have blacks and anything like that, but unless a already servant, I'm going to use servant instead of slave, because slave is such a horrible word. It is. I don't like it. The servant was born from an already serving family, so a servant that might have given birth to another baby, or they were possibly captured from war that the Ottoman Empire might have been fighting at the time, and they could have captured them. I think has something also to do with Christianity. Some Christian boys were brought in too, but they weren't tortured and ripped apart beyond belief like the American horrible ideal of slavery is. You have no idea how much my brain hurts right now just thinking about it. But the Ottoman Empire actually had a really interesting system of allowing their slaves or their servants to actually become independent. Now you might be thinking, well, so did African American slaves in America. You know, they could buy their freedom. Well, they had to get permission from their masters first. And even then, it never happened. Hardly ever did. And the slaves had to earn their own money. Now, whether that's the case or not in the Ottoman Empire, that's not the point. The point is, it didn't happen very often, and it was up to the slave to figure that out. In the Ottoman Empire, it was actually up to the master to make sure that their servants were taken care of. They made sure they were healthy. They were taken care of. Almost like, I want to say, like a butler to, like, a very rich family. It was more like a butler, except the butler could also go out and do crops if they wanted, I guess. But if they were taken care of, the master made sure if there was a female servant that was by themselves, they weren't married, that they were married off to a proper husband, that they were made sure they were taken care of so that they would go out on their own. Granted, it was still against their will, but at least in this case, they were not ripped apart and whipped beyond belief and become property. They weren't necessarily property. There is empires or countries with slaves, and then there's that the people have slaves, and then there's slaves in the country. I don't know how they worded it, but it was decently worded. There's a difference between a country who, ideally, their slavery was based in the whole core was based around slaves. That was their core laws. It was a culture. In the Ottoman Empire, they just had slaves. It wasn't like it was the sole thing. It usually belonged to higher ups in the social classes, so the lower classes didn't have slaves, but it also wasn't like as if the lower class became slaves themselves. So not everyone had a slave or a servant, and they had the opportunity to become independent and buy their own property and treated as equals to everybody else and could gain social status. In America, that wasn't possible for the African Americans. So we have this really very backwards contradictions of how slavery works. The Ottoman Empire versus the Americans. So why this sudden horrible treatment of African Americans here in America back then? And what's actually ironic is that somebody, I think it might have been us in the Americas back then, told the Ottoman Empire that what they were doing by keeping slaves was wrong. Mind you, the Ottoman Empire did not have primarily blacks. I mean, there was speckled here and there, but it wasn't like a lot. And it wasn't, the color of their skin was not the primary function. Again, it was about who they captured in war, and some Christians. I don't think they were captured or anything. I don't quite understand that portion very well. But I know there were some that were Christians. And the best part was, if you were a servant in the Ottoman Empire, you could practice your religion as you suited, whether you were a servant or not, by the way. You could be a Christian or a Jew, so long as you paid your taxes and you obeyed the laws, you were fine. You could do your religious purposes full. In America, you didn't have that. You're African American, you're not allowed to, you have to preach our God. You have to. That was horrible back then. So why this? In the Ottoman Empire, I don't understand how the roots started. All I know is that this slavery type is not based on that bias, because I'm not even sure why. All I know is, from what I've been taught in my humanities class, this X reason that I'm about to give you started the potential drive that is the African American slave trade. Now, I also want you to understand this is looking at it from a completely academic point of view. We're looking at this from a neutral academic. We're looking at this like as if we're doing a report for school. Okay? This is completely neutral. This is factual. Okay? I'm not saying this is correct. I'm not saying this is right. This is not right. This is horrible. This should never happen to anybody of any color, race, hell, species. We could say you never want to do this to dogs. I mean, you don't. You never want to do this to anybody of any kind of mental capacity, anything. The Ottoman Empire educated their servants. If we wanted to teach them, we could, but it wasn't mandatory, and most of them didn't. So, where do we go? I'm going to talk about the American Constitution of what they thought was okay. First off, let's get one thing also straight. Is that America, or actually the human race in general, all human race tends to follow this system of what they discovered by faith or by education of knowledge, science, math, had to justify what they thought was right. this happened in the Bible, therefore it completely justifies what I'm doing is correct. Or, science shows this, therefore it justifies us to act a certain way to these people. That's not okay. And that's part of what creates hate, which then creates racism and the like. So, what happened in the African American slave trade? Well, why is there even an African American slave trade? Here's your first one, sugar. To grow sugar is not easy. I couldn't tell you the steps, but it's not something you could just go out in your backyard and make, and it was very hard to make. So who were making it? The Africans. So, in Europe, if you had sugar, you were up there in the social class. You were the hierarchy. You were like, yeah, I'm awesome. It's kind of the equivalent to having a nice Lamborghini nowadays. Sugar was the it thing to have if you had it. So what'd they do? They go to Africa, and they can't grow the crop back home because they don't know how, and even if they got the information, they don't have enough people to grow it. So what they do? They start taking Africans to their place. Now, this part is fuzzy because it's a very harsh thing to think about. I'm not 100% sure if it's even correct, so there's an asterisk here. I am sorry if this is incorrect. Please comment below if for corrections, and I will post that comment and copy and paste into a annotation if I am incorrect. If I am not mistaken, the African Americans would sell their own people. I'm probably wrong, and I am sorry if I am. I am throwing out my ethos. Hey, look, literature just kind of made it into my podcast. But if I'm not mistaken, some tribes would sell some of their people away. Some of them were indeed captured. That's not to say this doesn't exist. Unless I read something wrong, which if I did, I am greatly sorry. I apologize right now. I could be wrong. But something of that equivalent happened. So not only did the Americans gain sugar, they also gained people. But back then, they weren't considered people. They didn't know what to think. So, they're over there in America. They're growing crops. They're growing the sugar. They're doing everything else plus their sugar. So, they're doing everything from the housework to milking the cow. And they start doing that. So, about 100 years or so go by. And in that 100 years, the African American slave trade stops, but the slaves keeps going. So the slave trade stops for financial, economic, political reasons. Whatever those reasons are, they stop. So the slaves continue, however, in America. We then get this really sad thing. This is the main focus of our little podcast. Okay? This is the focus. An interesting theory started to arise around the 1800s. People had this thrive for knowledge. We wanted to learn more, so we went on excavations. We went to go explore America and all the other worlds, meaning plants and animals. And then Darwinism. Darwin came to the picture, and it's a little interesting because Darwin, he accidentally created something when he created the idea of evolution. If that be so, the definition of Darwinism. Because what happened is, we ended up having this thing called social Darwinism. Now, if you don't believe in Darwinism, that's not the point. We had a very big group of scientific people who believed that Darwinism is the next group of thinking for identifying things and how they come to be. Here's the problem. Social Darwinism is the exact same thing as Darwinism. Darwinism is the best of the best survive. The fittest survive. And the weakest decline. So, social Darwinism is when the highest advanced of people survive, the not so advanced people die. Now, there's a problem with this. African Americans, or I should be saying Africans because they were living in Africa, the Africans were thriving. They were growing, at least. There was many of them. There was exponential numbers. So there was something wrong with this theory. But it soon decided to shift. Instead of taking that idea and going, well, maybe there's something going on here, they decide to flip it. So social Darwinism grew into this concept of ranking. There's actually a ranking system with the whites being on top and I believe it is African Americans on the bottom. I think the Irish are like right above that slot of the African Americans. And they created this ranking system of priority by looking at the skulls of those who have died in the past of these different races of people and seeing the shapes of their skulls to decide the intelligence, which that is just so stupid. You don't look at the size of the skull. That's like looking at a little blue box called a TARDIS and assuming there's no space in it. You can't do that. That's not how the brain works, but of course that's all they knew back then. So they looked at the skulls, and based on the size and shapes, they assumed, hey look, there's that word, assumed intelligence. So the African Americans got ranked towards the bottom because of the identifications of the skull size. What then followed, or at least was before then, was the idea and the theory that, I don't even like saying this because it's so wrong, but that the African Americans were supposedly humans inbred with chimpanzees, thus creating Africans. Now, no, that's not how this works, but that's what they thought. They took science, and that's what they came up with. Now, even if that was indeed a fact, what humans did was they justified it. They said, well, that's the case, therefore they deserve to be treated this way. Even if that became fact, that's not a reason. So, it then created this low negative outlook of African Americans and many other races, because of the scientific supposed outlook of how intelligent they were, the supposed mixing of them in humans and chimpanzees, and so on and such forth, created these horrible outlooks of people, and that not only were other races possibly other races, but they were other species altogether, which we later find out in science is not the case, because species cannot breed with each other, because the genetics are different. Well, you can obviously breed with an African American with a white person, or an Asian with an African American, or an Irish with an Asian. You know, you can. That's possible. We're all of the same species. But back then, they didn't know better. And that's half the battle. So, fast forward hundreds of years later to this day and age, that information and that mindset continues to this day and carries on forward the idea of racism, thanks to sugar and social Darwinism. I can't give you the answer on how to stop it. Some people have given brilliant suggestions, and we could always follow them. But it's not my job to say this is the answer. I don't like that we have racism. I don't like that we're homophobic. I don't like that we're sexist. I don't like that we treat animals based on species. I hate that we have this pit bull law that says, well, it's a pit bull, it can only stay for a day, then we gotta euthanize it because of its species. That's not okay. That's almost as bad as racism. It's the same thought, only it's not racism, it's dogs. It's animals, if there's a term for it. But what I'm starting to realize through this humanities class is that the human race likes to take things from religion, math, science, literature, and knowledge, whatever you want to define knowledge as, and that information is supposed to be, because of this, it means we're allowed to do that. It means because of the information that has been brought upon us, it gives us absolute permission to do what we are doing. Instead of saying, this information is brought to us. Is this really true? What are the proper scientific explanations we can do in explorations, continue research, and actually use our brains? And I use that loosely because if you would have told a scientist back in the day to use his head, he would have told you the exact same thing I just told you, because that's all they would have known, because we were still young as a human race, as a human species. So what I'm starting to slowly grip is that we take information, and we're doing it today with the homophobia we have in this nation, and that that God said, "Thou shalt not be marriage between a man and a woman and a woman," even though that's actually within debate because of different versions of the Bible being rewritten and retranslated. That's for a different day. And that we justify that to mean they can't get married, or that we are allowed to treat them a certain way. We still take information to this day and use it to justify our actions instead of taking it and saying, okay, that doesn't mean I can hurt them. Or that doesn't mean they deserve this. Or that doesn't mean that my actions are correct. It just means this information is presented to me. Now I have to learn to know how to apply it and use it. So, in the grand scheme of things, you would think, from a simple logical point of view, that knowledge, that we as a human race know how to take information and logic and knowledge and apply it to our everyday lives. We do. We wouldn't have clocks, we wouldn't have microphones, we wouldn't have the internet. That's just true. But sometimes, and it happens, we take information and faith, or other forms of knowledge and intellect and spirituality and emotion, and we say, it's okay because of this. Or that's, see, we were right because of this, therefore it's okay. Because we don't want to be proven wrong. As a race, we don't want to be proven that a certain thing is higher or lower than another. And it kind of links to feminism, because we don't want to say that, well, pink is a woman's color, even though it was a man's color since, like before the 30s, or 20s or 30s. But that justifies it. And if a woman can dress up like a man, but a man can't dress up like a woman, then you're still calling the women lower than men. Because you've given the men that painful embarrassment of being in something that's oh so woman. Instead of being just not wanting to do it, which is the more logical approach, and just saying, well, I just don't want to be in a skirt because that's just not who I am. That's the logical conclusion. Instead we say, oh, it's a woman's skirt, I don't want to wear a woman's skirt. You've just declared women lower. Even if you're a feminist, you've just declared women lower. So congratulations, you failed. But taking that into account, I'm starting to learn that the human race is a horrible thing. We're only a quarter of the way in the semester. I have a midterm next week, so hopefully I can get the rest of the details in my head. Because I feel this is an important class, but there's just so much crap. Oh, so much in my brain I want to put in there, but I can't. Hopefully next week's semester midterm will not be bad, and I won't be completely losing my freaking mind. Hopefully that all made sense. I wish I could just post my notes. I really wish I could do that, but I can't. If there's any information I've given incorrectly based on history of the African-American slave trade as well as the Ottoman Empire, or anything that's mentioned in this podcast, please comment below, and I will credit you in the annotations of this video / podcast, and it will be duly noted, and it will be extended throughout the video as corrected information. So please do so if there's anything that is incorrect or you would like to clarify or further explain. I will gladly post it. In the meantime, I will be free this weekend to a point. I do still have to study technically, but I have a friend from out of state who is visiting. For those of you who are personal friends of mine, you know who he is. As for everybody else, we'll see what happens, and maybe I'll do a podcast on it. But in the meantime, I'm going to close off, and hopefully in a week or two, I will actually have a mesh cover over the mic, so you won't be hearing that crap, which is so stupid. I don't like that sound at all, and hopefully I don't sound too quiet or too loud. So in the meantime, we will hopefully have a cleaned up podcast system going. So that is all for now. This is Mew-Z reporting off, and that's what I've learned in humanities. Maybe I'll do something for ethos, lothos, and pathos for literature, and we shall see what happens. I actually did better on time than I thought I would, so I'll go ahead and close off. I'm sweating in my room. Ugh, it's hot. I don't like it. Blech. So I will talk to you all later. Thanks for listening, and again, this is for academic purposes, so nothing is an offense to that. I guess one quick note I forgot to mention, involving the subject of today, is something you have to understand is that there has recently been an issue of censorship. Old literature like Mark Twain, the like, use the N-word or any other censored word that is nasty to this day. I'm going to go ahead and say this now. I don't feel it's okay to censor it. But Megan, it's a bad word. I understand that. when we are given these words, redskin, the N-word, yellow, they're not nice words. They're horrible, nasty words. They should never be said. I should never say them. No one ever should. But you have to understand that when these words were first said, it was a generalization and a neutral term. So the N-word was used in general sense. So when somebody says, my little N, insert word here, it wasn't out of nasty context. It was a generalized term until slurs came around, and when the nasty racism started to come in because of social Darwinism and our thoughts of how science worked and how we know better now, but that word evolved. But since the context is different back then, the term shouldn't be censored if it's featured in context back then. Now, if it's written in that past context, but it's written now, that's a little different. I can see censorship might be in a play, but it's something to consider. So, I'll go ahead and close off. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you on the next one. Leave me topics. I'm running out of topics, so leave me an idea that you want me to split around. I'll give you my 2 cents on it. I also might have to do a Pokemon podcast on my other channel, so it will be a special podcast. You'll see it on my Twitter if I ever post it. Hopefully I'll remember to post it on Twitter. Somebody on Twitter wanted me to do a Pokemon video on my Poke Reviews channel. Unfortunately, my editing software is not working correctly. It doesn't give me a visual preview of what's being displayed on screen. Instead, it can only give me the audio. It won't show. It's just a white box where the visual is supposed to show. So I can't purposely and effectively give you guys a proper video for that channel. So I might do a podcast. If you guys are interested in that, let me know, and I will simply do that. In the meantime, I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening. No offense is given to this. This is not meant to be any kind of slur thing. It's an academic look, a neutral look of how it started, and maybe we can correct ourselves. Do I have a suggestion? Yeah. Let's just go blind for about a day and just see what happens.